You wake slowly, not to a sudden sound, but to the slow change of light in the air. The pre-dawn coolness settles over your body, a damp weight against the rough-spun tunic you wear. You do not stir quickly. Movement feels unnatural and unnecessary in this hour between night and day. Your straw pallet gives away faintly under your weight, a soft give that suggests simple resignation to the weight of years and life lived in close quarters. You notice the way the air feels different now, thinner than true night, yet still carrying the chill residue of many hours of settled dark. You slowly rise, taking care not to disturb the sleeping arrangement around you. The great beasts are massive forms, solid mountains of muscle curled against the low walls. One ox head rests near your feet, its breathing a deep, predictable rhythm that vibrates faintly through the packed earth floor. You observe this pattern of shared rest. The huddled livestock, the sturdy wood of the stable beams, and yourself, all settled into one contained geometry of survival. The air smells complex at this hour. It is not merely the smell of animals, though manure and hay are undeniably present beneath a sharp tang of clean straw. There is something fainter, too, the earthy breath of damp soil pressing in from under the threshold, mingled with the faint, sweet scent of rendered fat warmed by recent night heat. You move quietly, your bare feet padding softly on the cool, uneven ground. Every step requires a small adjustment, an awareness of which way the dirt slopes slightly downward, or where a loose piece of straw might crunch too loudly. You trace your fingers along the rough timber support beam overhead, feeling the deep grain and the ingrained patina of smoke and time. It is in this quiet space that you begin to observe the architecture of simply existing here. Everything is fitted together, the troughs carved into the stone, the stalls lined with splintered wood, the narrow passageways meant for efficient movement, not comfort. You understand, instinctively, that these structures are built not just of material, but of routine and necessary cohabitation. When you pass the trough where water collected overnight, its surface is slick with dew and residual feed scraps. The coolness rises from it gently, a vaporous coldness that contrasts slightly with the body heat emanating from nearby sleeping forms. You pause near the great trough to just listen, to the almost imperceptible drips of condensation falling back into the murky depth. The silence here is not an absence of sound. It is a deep accumulation of low noises, the soft snuffle of a boar, the periodic sighing exhalation from a sleeping cow, the occasional squeak of shifting harness leather. These sounds do not demand attention, but simply exist as the backdrop against which your movements are measured. You draw a slow breath, tasting the pre-dawn mixture of damp straw, cold stone, and musky animal scent. This specific blend is the signature of home at this hour. It holds the promise of warmth to come, alongside the steady commitment required by its creatures. When you finally reach your simple wash basin in the corner, the water is barely cool enough to raise goosebumps on your skin. You use a rough-woven cloth to wipe away any lingering sleep marks from your hands and forearms. The ritual of cleansing, though minimal, establishes you within the ongoing cycle of maintenance. This initial care, performed when no one else yet stirs, feels like preparing yourself for an invisible shift in time. You notice small details. A single length of discarded twine tied haphazardly to a wooden support, the faint indentation where a sturdy beast has been pressed against the wall over many seasons, the patina on the metal fittings that speaks of years spent resisting damp and wear. These are not dramatic markers, but quiet evidence of persistent life. As the sliver of true dawn begins to color the high horizon, painting the edges of the sky with a pale, washed-out gray pink, you finally shift your focus toward the main stable yard. The light is still insufficient to cast sharp shadows, so everything retains a soft, blended quality. You observe the various animals, the nervous twitching ear of the goat near the doorway, the settled weight of the bull in the farthest stall, the way the hens cluck softly in their nesting boxes, already sensing the need for fresh ground. The transition into day is profoundly gradual here, a slow brightening rather than an abrupt awakening. It requires patience to perceive it. You simply stand still, absorbing this moment, the boundary between deep rest and immediate effort. This shared existence teaches that nothing, especially not time, moves with haste. It merely accumulates in these subtle shades of gray light. The weak sun, just beginning to spill over the low thatch of the adjoining building, does not strike you with heat. Rather, it arrives as a wash of dusty, pale gold that seems to filter through the damp weave of the eaves. You stretch slowly, deliberately, feeling the slight ache in your limbs, a slow protest from muscles unused to full wakefulness. The air is still cool, carrying a complex perfume, the mineral tang of wet earth mixed with the sweet, musky breath of sleeping animals and the faint, smoky residue of last night's embers. You slide off your woven straw pallet. Your bare feet meet the packed dirt floor, which retains the chill even under the morning sun. The air moves very little, yet you feel it against your skin, a gentle current that smells faintly of hay and cold river water. Around you, the great forms of the oxen remain settled in their trough space. Their breathing is deep and rhythmic, a soft bellows sound punctuated by occasional snorts that barely disturb the stillness. Your first task emerges from necessity, gathering the residual spillage. You move toward the central watering trough, which lies low to the ground, collecting water spilled overnight onto the dirt earth. The puddle at your feet is thick with mud and some fine organic debris, stained a brackish brown from the mingling of animal waste and morning moisture. Kneeling down, you scoop up the slop with your hands, gathering it into a loose pile near the threshold. This small act requires careful attention to balance and proximity, linking your immediate body movement to the ground underfoot. The mud feels cold and slightly oily against your skin, a distinct sensation that anchors you firmly in this moment of early rising labor. You pause after collecting the water, lifting your head to observe the space around the trough opening. The simple architecture of the dwelling dictates these movements. Everything is designed for efficient function, built low to withstand the damp cold and close enough so that communal life, both human and animal, remains within earshot. Next, you address the smaller tasks, the feeding. You move toward the corner stall where the ewes are penned in for milking later. Their breath hitches slightly as you approach, recognizing your presence, even in their deep morning lethargy. The fodder, stored in woven baskets just out of reach, smells strongly of cured meadow grass and dry hay. You begin to distribute handfuls of this rough sustenance, careful not to scatter too much seed or grain into the path, which would only create further mess later. The physical act of feeding is repetitive. Lift, measure, place. With each small movement, you notice the wear on your own clothing and hands. The weave of your tunic has snagged slightly near the elbow, a tear that will require attention later. This quiet awareness of personal material needs, the frayed thread, the dulling edge of a tool, is interwoven with the maintenance of the entire communal space. You walk past the stable area where the harness equipment hangs on low pegs. You inspect the leather straps and thick ropes used to secure the beasts for market or labor. A patch of leather has cracked near one of the bridle buckles, bleached dry by months of varying dampness and occasional brush with rough forest undergrowth. The texture is brittle beneath your fingertips, a sharp reminder that even durable goods succumb slowly to time and elemental wear. You mentally catalog this needed repair, a small list of responsibilities for the day. Passing these places encourages you to slow down. You do not move quickly through them. Rather, you move in observation of their quiet order. The methodical preparation required for these morning chores, the gathering of spillage, the careful feeding, the inspection of equipment, is a grounding routine that establishes the rhythm for the hours ahead. It is a structured existence where inertia must be overcome by gentle, continuous motion. Your attention shifts now to the central animal space. You help shepherd a couple of young goats away from the main sleeping area towards a slightly clearer path outside the stable door. The goats are twitchy creatures in the morning light, suddenly aware and restless. They kick at the packed earth with careless energy, their horns catching the dusty sunlight momentarily. Their movement is unpredictable, requiring you to adjust your pace and angle simply to keep them clustered together without causing alarm. The scent of goat musk is sharp and distinct, different from the heavier, earthy smell of the cattle. As they are moved, you find yourself paying attention to how their small hooves click on the uneven stones that border the yard, a light, musical sound that breaks up the pervasive quietude. This contrast between the heavy, deep breathing of the large beasts and the nervous, clicking energy of the small ones defines this unique morning chorus. The routine is simple but exhaustive, establishing order, removing waste, providing sustenance. It requires a sustained physical presence in the shared space. The tasks are immediate and visible: a pile of discarded straw, an empty bucket, a patchy section of ground that needs scraping clean. There is a deep satisfaction, quiet and unsung, in completing these necessary movements, knowing that this stable groundwork allows for everything else to happen later. As you finish clearing the last patch of grit near the wash pit, you feel the persistent cool air rising from the damp earth through your rough-spun trousers. You straighten up, wiping a smear of dirt and water residue onto your forearm, a simple gesture that feels necessary to complete the rite of waking work. Your body has settled into the familiar, slow rhythm of communal life. The initial demanding energy of dawn's labor is fading, replaced by a steady, contained readiness, anticipating the next phase, the meal and the gathering warmth. The day's work has settled into a rhythm of soft movements. You are near the hearth, where the deep, restful glow of wood fire continues its steady burn. The air here is heavy with warmth and the complex, beautiful aroma of yesterday's smoke, a smell that seems to cling to everything in your clothing, settling into the pores of your skin like a second layer of scent. You sit close enough to feel the radiant heat on your cheek, but far enough back that you do not blister your hands or arms. The wood, having burned down through its initial crackling frenzy, now emits a deep, sweet smell, almost resinous, signaling a slower, more constant consumption of matter. You lift a wooden ladle, noticing the grain patterns smoothed by generations of use, a silent testament to the life lived around this very pit. It feels balanced and cool in your hand. You dip it into the cast iron pot resting over the embers. The pot is thick, black, and radiates residual heat up through its curved sides. The metal seems immensely solid, a dependable weight against the transient nature of smoke and warmth. The contents of the pot are simple: grain porridge, perhaps barley or oats, thickened slightly with leftover vegetables from last night's scraps. As you stir it slowly, the wooden ladle scrapes gently against the stone base, a soft, rasping sound that feels utterly normal in this place. You watch the mixture change color subtly under the firelight, from creamy off-white to a warmer, pale gold. This porridge represents sustenance taken from the earth, refined by fire and time. As you stir, your thoughts drift not to what is for dinner, but to the source of the smoke itself. You recall the specific scent of the wood logs stacked earlier, some oak, sharp and dry, others perhaps willow, sweeter and softer when consumed. Each type carries a different history in its own combustibility, influencing the gentle haze that drifts up toward the eaves of your home. The accumulation of this smoky atmosphere is what defines being inside the house. It is not just smoke, but life filtered through wood smoke, a mixture with the scent of animal musk from the penned animals nearby, wet earth from morning cleaning, and the underlying tang of stale cooking grease. This amalgamation is simply the smell of shared survival. You notice a small patch of soot on your own forearm, residue from handling tools near the flames earlier this morning. You do not immediately wipe it away. Instead, you look at it, acknowledging its presence as another marker of your day's activities. It tells a story of warmth and necessary labor. The meal is ready to be served, but the act itself requires no haste. You pour the porridge into thick earthenware bowls, passing them carefully between those seated nearby. The pottery is uneven in places, evidence of its hand-thrown creation. Each bowl feels comforting, solid against your palms. You pause with your own bowl, bringing it close to your face to inhale the steam, a gentle, moist breath that carries the warm scent of cooked grain and savory herbs. This simple act grounds you completely in the present moment. It is a small luxury, this chance to simply smell the warmth and safety of your immediate dwelling. Nearby, the cattle rest, their large bodies forming quiet bulwarks against the chill of the coming afternoon. You watch them settle, observing the deep folds of hide around their powerful haunches. Their existence seems utterly unhurried. They breathe in long, slow cycles that contrast with the more immediate tempo of human life, the need to lift, to cut, to stir. You reflect on how deeply this hearth anchors your household. It is the central point around which all activity pivots, sleep before it, cooking during it, and perhaps even mending near it later. The stones forming its base absorb the heat over hours, holding a persistent warmth that whispers against the encroaching coolness of the walls. The smoke, continually rising, acts like an invisible veil, binding together disparate smells. The medicinal tang of wood smoke mixed with the lactic scent of cooling milk, or the sharp, clean smell of wet woolen fibers. It is this unified blend of sensory input that defines the rhythm of your medieval dwelling, a continuous olfactory tapestry. You take a slow sip of the warm porridge. The gentle warmth spreads through you, moving down into the core of your belly, offering simple comfort. You feel the settling weight of the day's routines, those small tasks from dawn to this mealtime. The water carried, the feed distributed, the wood cut, and they accumulate into a quiet sense of accomplished being. The fire crackles again, not with violence, but with an almost audible sigh. A smaller log shifts against the larger coals, sending up a quick puff of bright orange sparks that rise and dissolve into the smoky ceiling. It is a fleeting moment of brilliance within the steady amber glow, reminding you that even permanence relies on the continuous action of burning wood. You sit back in your seat, listening not for sounds to start, but for them to fade. The dominant sound is the soft, constant creak of settling timbers, and the barely audible chewing of cud from the animals nearby, the low hum of deep domestic peace. This quiet moment, suspended between morning duties and afternoon rest, is purely about observation. Observing the smoke curling toward the rafters, observing the steady glow reflecting in your own slightly tired eyes, accepting the comforting weight of shared life within these smoky, smoky walls. The work of the needle seems to slow your breath, pulling you into a deep pool of quiet concentration. The thread passes through the worn fabric with a soft sigh, a sound that is barely audible above the gentle whirring in your own ears. You are sitting by the window opening, and the morning light has found a peculiar angle today. It does not blaze, but instead enters like filtered honey, illuminating the dust motes dancing lazily in the beam. These tiny specks catch the sunlight, making them visible, a microscopic ballet happening just inches from your elbow. You lift your head slightly, letting your gaze drift past the rough-hewn sill and out into the small yard beyond. The linen you are mending is thin, already bearing its age through faint silvering lines across the surface. The fabric whispers under your practiced fingers, a familiar roughness that speaks of countless washings and careful repairs by hands before yours. As you guide the needle, thinking only of the tension required to keep the rip seamless, you become acutely aware of the subtle scent profile around you, a blend dominated by old wool, warmed dust, and the faint, comforting musk that always seems to emanate from the deeper parts of the house where the animals settle for their midday rest. It is a complex smell, rooted in earth and animal life, far removed from the sharp, clean scents of soap or polished wood. Outside, the pace moves at the slow rhythm of a small working community. A cart wheels past the corner, the wooden spoke hitting the cobblestones with a muted thud that vibrates through the solid ground beneath your legs. The rhythmic sound acts as a deep time clock, marking moments without urgency. You watch the wheel's movement, the way it dips and rises slightly over uneven stones. Each turn of the axle seems to take deliberate effort from the unseen handler pulling the rope. It is not a dramatic rush. It is simply transport, essential motion, continuing regardless of the weather or the time of day. Your thoughts settle on the physical details of your craft. The wool sock you are working on has lost its original creamy whiteness to varying shades of tan and gray, evidence of every soil they trod upon, every seasonal change they endured. You notice a small discrepancy in the stitching pattern near the heel, a slight pulling that suggests the sock might be stretched too tautly, or perhaps has simply suffered wear from overuse. This observation demands a minute adjustment of tension, forcing your mind to slow down even further, concentrating solely on the geometry of the fiber and the necessity of repair. The simplicity of this task becomes a meditative anchor. You learn to track time not by the passage of hours, but by the measurable completion of stitches. The pull of the thread is steady, demanding an equally steady pace from your wrist. It is a deep satisfaction found in making something whole again, mending what others have allowed to fray into neglect. This act of preservation extends beyond mere cloth. It speaks to the value placed on continuity, on keeping things functional and usable for another cycle. When you finally allow your eyes to lift from the immediate task, a rare pause that feels necessary after hours of close focus, you notice details in the neighboring rooftops. They are varied, a patchwork quilt of slate gray mixed with warmer, sun-faded terracotta. Each roofline tells a silent story of ownership and longevity. Some angles are steep, designed to shed water quickly during heavy rain. Others slope more gently, perhaps belonging to a structure built for grazing or storage rather than habitation. You trace these lines mentally, charting the physical landscape around your home. There is a deep connection between what you mend here and the surrounding environment. The resilience required to keep this linen whole mirrors the sturdy endurance of the building itself, nestled into the curve of the lane. Similarly, the robust nature of the woolen socks reflects the need for dependable footwear in a life constantly interacting with rough ground, wet dew, and stray bits of thorn or grit. You reach down your hand, resting it lightly on the table beside your work. The wood grain is cool and smooth beneath your palm, worn soft by countless hands before you even occupied this space. The coolness reminds you that nothing remains static. Everything slowly changes. the weave, the stone, the life forms passing outside. The sensory input from the environment deepens gently. You begin to hear sounds separate from the immediate noises of the house. There is a persistent, gentle buzzing sound coming from the direction of the small garden patch visible through the window opening. It is the combined sound of bees moving methodically among flowering herbs. This buzz has a different quality than human sound. It is organic, insistent, and totally focused on its own immediate task of sustenance. You realize that these little insects are performing the same endless, dedicated cycle that you are engaged in, the collecting of sweetness, the commitment to survival. As the sunlight shifts again, bathing the corner in a slightly warmer tone, you consider the concept of shared existence. The very act of mending is communal. While your hands perform the action alone, the object itself and the time spent are part of the household rhythm. You live within this weave, the weave of the linen, the weave of the daylight fading across the textiles, and the larger, invisible weave that connects every human effort to the care of the animals nearby. The wool feels wonderfully substantial under your fingers now. The repairs are done for the moment, a segment completed. You set the work aside, not finished, but temporarily paused. Taking a slow, measured breath, you allow yourself to absorb the quiet peace that only comes after sustained, repetitive concentration. It is a deep stillness, one that settles into the bones, allowing the day's tasks ahead, the eventual journey through the village, the necessary transactions at the market edge, to feel less like demands and more like inevitable continuations of this gentle domestic rhythm. You pull your coarse tunic straight against the dew-damp air of mid-morning. The air here, outside the close confines of the household, carries a different weight than the stale musk and smoke you left behind. It smells primarily of damp earth, mingled with the fainter, sweeter scent of cut hay and wood smoke that has settled from yesterday's fires. You adjust your pace as you lead the animals along the muddy path leading away from the cluster of roofs. The rhythm of your steps matches the steady crunch of gravel underfoot, though much of it is still softened by dew into a thick, spongy, yielding mud. Each footfall sends up a small puff of disturbed earth that quickly settles back down, making almost no sound at all. You feel the weight of the tethered goat at your hip, its head occasionally bobbing to test the direction of travel with a gentle nudge against your thigh. Its breath is shallow and warm against the cool morning air. You observe the quality of the light as you walk. It is not the sharp, high glare of midday, but rather a soft, diffused silver gold that seems to have been filtered through a haze of mist still clinging low to the ground. This gentle illumination casts long, indistinct shadows ahead and behind you, making every puddle look like a small, reflective mirror capturing the pale sky above. You notice how the sunlight catches the wet fibers of the grass near the path, a momentary flash of dull green that is both beautiful and ordinary. The passage to the common ground requires moving through several smaller lanes than those directly adjacent to your home. These paths belong to other dwellings, meaning you must navigate around obstacles. A stack of chopped firewood leaned against a low, whitewashed wall, a child's discarded wooden toy near a doorway threshold, and baskets woven from reeds filled with early-gathered forage. Each time you sidestep an object or detour around a small corner, your attention is drawn to the subtle architecture of the village. The houses press closely together, their timbers dark and ancient against the lighter plastering. You reflect on how these structures seem built not merely for habitation, but also in relation to one another, forming a tightly woven communal organism that shares resources, walls, and sunlight. The movement is slow, dictated by the pace of the animals. The goat stops frequently, examining patches of greener weeds growing near a drainage ditch. You pause too, slowing your own rhythm until your breathing matches the scattered chewing sounds coming from the animal. You notice a cluster of wild berries clinging to a thorny bush just off the path, small, dark jewels that contrast sharply with the muted greens and browns of the surroundings. You resist the urge to pick them, simply observing their rich color against the harsh backdrop of necessity. As you continue towards the open common ground, the nature of your journey changes subtly. The lanes become wider here, the buildings giving way to more open space that smells strongly of trampled grass and manure, the unavoidable scent of productive life. You feel a subtle shift in the air pressure as you move away from the protective canyon formed by the houses. Your shoulders relax slightly, adopting the posture of someone moving between enclosed spaces and vast openness. The purpose of this walk is sustenance and tending. You reach an area where other villagers are already beginning their own daily tasks. There are men carrying rough baskets overflowing with newly gathered root vegetables, women arranging damp bundles of laundry to dry near a communal washing stone, and the lowing murmur of cattle being driven into a sectioned-off pasture. These interactions do not require your participation. You simply move through them, observing the practiced efficiency of neighboring lives. You guide the goat towards the designated grazing patch just beyond the edge of the common ground. The earth here is firmer, already worn smooth by generations of hooves and passage. You notice tiny trails etched into the damp soil, a rabbit's quick passage, the dragging scrape of a wagon wheel hours ago. These miniature historical records on the ground speak to the constant, relentless flow of life. The goat begins to graze with purpose, tearing at clumps of rich grass near the boundary fence. You loosen the tether around its neck, allowing it more room to roam within the allocated space. As you stand watching it feed, your attention is drawn back to the people nearby. A woman kneels down beside a patch of wild thyme growing stubbornly between two stones. She picks handfuls carefully, her movements economical and ingrained. Her focus tells you everything about her purpose, the simple, profound utility of noticing what grows where. You walk around the periphery of this open space, feeling the sun begin to warm the backs of your hands. The warmth is not oppressive, but a steady, gentle permeation that promises labor and continues it throughout the day. You think about the necessary relationship between the home and the outside world, that the shelter provided by the walls and the hearth must be continually supported by the bounty drawn from this damp, open ground. The sheer volume of life around you, the grazing animals, the clustered people, the ever-present smell of rich soil and animal warmth, is a complex tapestry woven together by routine. It is not chaotic. It operates on a deep, steady hum of necessary exchange. You continue to walk along the perimeter, your steps unhurried, letting the slow rhythm of the communal clearing settle into your own pace. The sun climbs higher now, intensifying the clarity of the air and drawing out the smell of damp leaves giving way to warm dust. This passage is less a journey and more an unfolding, expanding from the private safety of the hearth to the shared openness that sustains it all. The morning's necessary tasks have settled into a comfortable rhythm, the edge of the clearing marked by the occasional spill of goods or the quiet murmur of greetings. You stand now where the lane meets the slightly more open space, the periphery of where things are traded. The air here holds a different scent than inside the household, carrying faint traces of other people's smoke and wet leather boots. It is a smell of commerce, but not of rush. You settle yourself near an old wooden stall, perhaps belonging to a neighbor who sells woven baskets or smoked fish. You are simply present, observing the pattern of exchange that defines this corner of existence. People move slowly here, their focus fixed on the transactions at hand, on the goods stacked upon rough trestle tables. The light coming into this market edge space is brighter than the sheltered interior, yet it is filtered. It passes through the gaps between roofs and stalls, creating stripes of gold and shadow across the damp earth. You notice how the dust motes dance in those shafts of morning sun, tiny visible remnants of last night's life. You consider your own hands resting at your side. They feel steady, perhaps a little stiff from yesterday's work. The skin has a texture that tells stories, small cuts from hauling kindling, ingrained stains from working with grain, the deep creases formed by repetitive actions. These hands are part of the tapestry of this community, instruments honed for survival. A neighbor approaches, carrying a bundle of freshly gathered herbs tied with twine. They pause near you, not speaking immediately, but taking in your presence. You meet their gaze for a brief moment, a look that acknowledges shared life and mutual dependence. The silence between the greetings is thick with meaning, heavier than spoken words. You listen to the sounds around you, the occasional clatter of pottery being shifted, the rhythmic scraping of sandals on packed mud, the lowing of a beast tethered nearby whose needs have already been met for the day. These sounds are not random noise. They are markers of routine, predictable rhythms that keep life moving forward. There is a small exchange near you involving sacks of flour. You watch the vendor weigh the grain, noting the careful dip and lift of the scale pan. The weight gives him an immediate understanding of worth, not just the silver coin being passed, but the effort, the sun sweat, required to grow that commodity. You observe the way other people interact with their goods. Goods are not merely objects, they are extensions of labor. The farmer handles his root vegetables with a careful respect, as if handling an important member of his own family. The weaver straightens her dyed wool against her hip, its pattern speaking of hours spent under steady tension. The conversation that eventually drifts toward you is subdued, kept at the volume necessary only for those standing immediately close. It concerns the recent rainfall, how it might affect the coming season's yield, or perhaps the expected movement of prices for hay. These discussions are not dramatic pronouncements. They are careful assessments, measured whispers built on years of shared experience. You find yourself listening deeply to the underlying current beneath these exchanges. It is a quiet thread of common concern that binds everyone together, the need for continuance. The well must be filled, the roof must stay dry, and the stomach must remain full. The reflection you carry from your own household, the scent of smoke and damp earth, the steady rhythm of feeding animals, feels completely integrated into this periphery space. These are not separate realities. They flow into each other. The manure beneath your feet is fertilizer for another man's patch of beans. Your carefully tended dwelling relies on the passing goods traded here. You watch a child, perhaps wandering from a parent who is absorbed in negotiations, drop a small item, a piece of hardened clay or a smooth stone, into the dirt path. The sound is negligible, almost swallowed by the ambient hum of quiet commerce. But you notice it, marking the passage through that spot. As the light continues to climb and deepen, you feel the familiar steady pull back toward your routine. But this time, there is an additional layer to your understanding. You realize that every small exchange here, the bartering of gossip, the measurement of flour, the nod between neighbors, is a necessary act of binding magic. It keeps the entire intricate machinery of village life turning smoothly. The connection you feel passing through these murmurs and movements is one of deep, reliable belonging. You are anchored to this place, tethered by shared needs and mutual recognition. The edge of the market clearing is where the individual self meets the necessary collective. It is simply where life reaffirms itself every day. You find yourself drawn towards the edge of the small enclosed yard, where the cultivated ground meets the rougher, untamed earth. The air here carries a distinct sharpness, different from the comforting blend of wood smoke and livestock musk within the walls. It is the scent of soil that has been working since before you woke up, damp loam mixed with the fainter, sharper tang of manure and clover. You kneel slowly on your heels, feeling the cool give of the earth pressing against your tunic. The sunlight now hits differently here, angled through more leaves than it did in the cramped alleyways near the hearth. It is a softer, greener light that seems to filter the sharpness from the air. Before you lies a patch of land, perhaps bordering another household's allotment, yet distinct in its necessary quiet. Your hands reach out naturally, brushing away some accumulated debris. A brittle, brown leaf, a small knot of dried grass, maybe an occasional shard of clay. You are not performing any grand task, merely observing the boundary where human order meets nature's slow persistence. It is here that much of your day's learning resides. You note the texture of the topsoil. It is crumbly in some places, rich and dark with organic matter. In others, near a visible trickle of water runoff, it is almost slick and compacted. The unevenness tells a story of seasons past, the shallow grooves left by passing rains, the occasional indentations from hoofprints long since faded into the mud. This borderland is where skills are honed quietly. You think back to the satisfying ache in your forearms after spending time with tools, not the tiring kind, but the deep, useful soreness that suggests competence. It is a knowledge built slowly, measured by repetition and careful attention. You move toward a low pile of discarded wood, kindling perhaps from days earlier, and pick up a small axe head, testing its weight in your palm. The metal feels cool against your skin, bearing the faint patina of use. You bring it into a meditative motion, running a thumb across the edge before setting it down gently onto a wooden stool. The act of sharpening is intensely focused. You find a whetstone, a slab of rock that has been ground and prepared for this singular purpose. The familiar grit of the stone meets the blade with a soft, steady whisper. There is no haste required, only even pressure, an understanding of resistance and yield. The sound itself becomes a rhythmic anchor. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. You watch the minute particles of metal dust flake away, darkening the gray surface of the whetstone. This small labor, this dedication to maintaining a single edge, reflects how much of life here depends on these small, sharp points of skill and readiness. The quiet craft you are learning is not just the handling of steel. It is an intimate understanding of materials, wood grain resisting the bite, stone yielding its dust. It is the patience required for things that must be durable, reliable, able to withstand the weight of daily necessity. Without thinking, your gaze drifts past the sharpening implements towards a row of drying herbs tucked into a woven basket, thyme, lavender, and some wild-looking fennel whose scent is sharp and sweet. You realize how much sustenance comes from observation, knowing when a root was ready to pull, or when the dew would be at its peak saturation for gathering leaves. Your reflection settles on the nature of effort itself. It is rarely spectacular. The greatest advancements, a successful harvest, a sturdy roof that lasts through winter, a well-tended beast, are built upon countless repetitions of small actions. You consider the farmer who spent hours weeding one stubborn row, or the shepherd guiding an errant lamb back to the flock. These were acts requiring unwavering focus and quiet endurance. You rise slowly from your kneeling position, stretching your shoulders until you feel the gentle pop in your spine. The movement feels less like exertion and more like uncoiling a tightly wound piece of rope. Next, your attention draws to a patch of earth that seems particularly yielding, a spot where perhaps some forgotten seeds lie waiting. You kneel again, not for work, but simply to touch the ground with open palms. The soil responds immediately to your heat, feeling marginally warmer than the surrounding areas. It is fertile, calling back to the life it holds in reserve. You remember observing the different ways local people interact with the land. One family might rely on fallow periods, letting the earth rest and recover its own strength. Another might engage in coppicing, deliberately cutting trees back to promote dense new growth. Each method is dictated by the specific temperament of the ground before you. The understanding here grows richer than simple knowledge. It becomes an instinct. It's knowing how deeply a root structure can penetrate damp clay, or how much sun-baked chalk will shift with the lightest tread. These details are woven into the quiet fabric of existence, inseparable from breathing and heart rate. As the afternoon deepens slightly, the light shifts again, losing its intense vertical quality and adopting a more diffused wash. This softer illumination encourages you to slow your pace even further. You gather several small bundles of dry kindling, the brittle pieces that catch quickly but burn clean, and arrange them neatly against a nearby stone retaining wall. The tactile pleasure of this arrangement is palpable. The satisfying scratch as the little twigs brush against each other, the slight give of the larger, more substantial sticks. You are building something small and perfectly contained, an object designed solely for later, reliable warmth. This practice mirrors the way life here operates. Everything must be prepared in advance, stowed away with care. The embers of yesterday's fire require gathering wood today. The empty stomach requires diligent foraging and preparation, now to sustain through the slow hours that follow. Your mind drifts back to the animals, their role not merely as sources of labor or sustenance, but as living components of the whole cycle. They graze on the borderland grasses just as you observe it. They move across the ground with a confident rhythm entirely attuned to the seasonal rhythms. Their sheer presence anchors you here, linking your individual efforts, the sharpening of an axe head, the gathering of kindling, to the vast, continuous engine of survival. You stand up slowly now, carrying a sense of quiet satisfaction derived from tangible effort. The sweat on your brow feels clean, rinsed by the mild afternoon air. You feel connected to this specific patch of earth, realizing that every successful turn of the plow, every neatly stacked pile of wood, is an act of profound respect for the cycle itself. The land does not dictate its rhythm, it simply is. And your craft lies in learning how to move with its inherent tempo, supporting its needs without demanding too much, accepting only what must be given and diligently preparing what must be taken. The late afternoon light is changing, shifting from the sharp clarity of work hours to a softer, amber hue. You feel this change in the air pressure, a subtle softening that whispers of approaching evening. Your movements slow naturally. The urgency that marked the morning's chores begins to dissipate like heat haze on dry stone. You find yourself near the grouping of livestock, where the day's routine has paused into stillness. A few fat hens scratch slowly at the dusty earth, entirely unhurried. Near the enclosure wall, 2 old cows rest side by side. Their breathing is a slow, rhythmic puffing that seems to measure time itself. You settle onto a low stone ledge nearby, not out of necessity, but because the quiet invitation of the place feels too deep to ignore. You notice the details of the resting animals. The aged coat of one cow, dappled in shades of brown and cream, has patches worn smooth by years of rubbing against wooden railings. You observe how its muzzle occasionally lifts to catch a stray scent, perhaps the sweet decay of clover, or maybe just the clean smell of evening air mingling with dust. There is nothing remarkable about this observation, yet it settles over you like the comforting weight of old wool. The quiet companionship they offer is not dramatic. It simply exists, solid and persistent like the ground beneath your feet. You watch a large dog curled up at your feet. It is an animal with more bone than muscle, bearing the visible signs of years spent guarding this small household. Its breathing is deep and even, occasionally punctuated by a soft, breathy sigh. You trace patterns in the dirt with a finger, watching tiny grains lift and fall, mirroring the slow passage of time marked by these creatures' quiet existence. The dog's ear twitches almost imperceptibly at some distant sound. The creak of cart wheels on the main road, perhaps before sinking back into sleep. You realize that this creature, like the cows, anchors your momentary peace through its simple need for rest. The air carries a mix of scents now. The metallic tang of damp earth near the troughs, the sweeter musk emanating from wool and warm breath, and underneath it all, the ghost scent of wood smoke, hinting at supper to come. These mingled odors are not unpleasant. They are simply the smell of life being lived thickly in one space for many generations. You consider the nature of this companionship. It is a relationship built on non-expectation. The animals do not judge your weariness or critique the simple texture of your clothes. They simply require your presence, sometimes just by existing peacefully within arm's reach. This quiet understanding feels like a gentle balm to the busy edges of your mind. You slowly shift your focus to a few bundles of dried forage near the wall. The straw holds the warmth of the day's harvest, dry, brittle stalks stacked neatly in a forgotten corner. You contemplate how much time and labor went into gathering this sustenance, a quiet testament to human patience, paralleled only by the slow growth of the grazing grass outside. The golden light begins its descent now, intensifying the warm tones on all surfaces. Shadows stretch long across the packed earth, giving depth and dimension to every minor unevenness in the ground, every stone edge. You notice how much clearer the outlines are when the sun angle is low. The subtle curl of grass blades at the border, the pattern of sunlight filtering through a dusty window pane. You contemplate that even the seemingly simplest parts of existence, a sleeping dog's twitching ear, a cow's slow chew, the way light angles off a polished stone trough, become subjects worthy of quiet contemplation. They offer small lessons in accepting the pace of things, the deliberate pace of cud chewing, the deep satisfaction of simply breathing, the unhurried rhythm of natural rest. There is a philosophical peace here that comes not from grand ideas or sudden breakthroughs, but from noticing the consistent and reliable rhythms of things that have simply always been. The beat of heart against chest, the steady intake and release of breath, these forms of being are ancient constants in your life. They teach you to slow down, to anchor yourself in the immediate sensory reality rather than letting your thoughts drift toward what was or what might be. You rise slowly from the ledge, stretching out the stiffness that has settled into your lower back after hours of quiet repose. The air feels cooler now, a crisp promise of twilight descending. You brush some dry dust off your tunic, gathering your composure for the next stage of the day's slow cycle. Heading toward the main house as the light gives way to the deep blue-gray hum of early evening. The last persistent gleam of daylight is receding now, pulling the color from the edges of the day until everything seems steeped in a deepening, cool gray. You move through the final stages of the afternoon's necessary circuit and find yourself drawing closer to the enclosed life of the home. A profound coolness settles upon your skin, a distinct drop in temperature that signals the rapid passage into evening. This chill is not merely an absence of warmth. It carries with it the heavy scent of cooling earth, damp thatch, and the collective musk of all the creatures housed within the small cluster of buildings around you. You pause at the edge of the enclosed yard, feeling the change in air pressure against your cheeks. The last rays of sun that managed to penetrate the eaves are now merely faint orange washes on the upper walls, giving way quickly to shadows that seem to deepen and fold into themselves beneath the wagon wheels and stored beams. You notice the gradual shift in the animal rhythms around you. Those once twitching ears settle back against thick necks, the last signs of alertness dimming into deep repose. There is a slowing down, a universal withdrawal of energy as the day's cycle draws to its close. Your first task becomes drawing the evening fire forward. The woodpile seems vast and necessary against the encroaching gloom. You walk toward it, your footsteps padding softly on the dirt floor, disturbed only by scattered bits of straw and small pellets of dry manure mixed with dust. As you approach the stacked logs, you begin the slow labor of collecting fuel. You are not gathering randomly. There is a practiced sense in the movement, knowing which pieces burn best, which will take time to catch fire, and which must be set aside for later coals. The wood itself has its own scent, a sharp, sweet resin mixed with the subtle dampness absorbed from the ground. You handle small sticks until they feel smooth and cool against your palms, testing their dry weight. This physical interaction is repetitive, grounding you in the moment. As you measure out handfuls of kindling, placing them carefully into a woven basket, you observe how quickly the light diminishes, forcing you to rely more on the contrast between the faint ambient glow filtering through the gaps in the surrounding houses and the increasingly deep shadows that cling to every corner. The water trough waits near the stable entrance. It has been emptied earlier in the day, but now you see patches of mud clinging near the stone lip, darkened by seepage over years. You kneel beside it, feeling the cold slickness of the stone under your knees. The water that remains is deep and still, reflecting the bruised colors of the western sky, mauve blending into indigo. Gathering the buckets becomes an act of slow negotiation with gravity and resistance. The cool weight of the sloshing water in the pail feels substantial, anchoring you to the present time. You haul it back toward the washing area, listening to the rhythmic splash as the liquid hits the packed earth floor. That sound, the wet thud, followed by a soft splatter, is one of the defining sounds of this transitional hour. You think about how much energy was required just to maintain the flow of life today. The feeding, the mending, the short exchanges in the clearing. Everything expended, and everything must be conserved now for the night's rest. You feel the subtle weight of the day settling into your joints, a dull ache that requires slow, deliberate movements. Next, you turn your attention to securing your garments against the coming temperature drop. The transition from midday activity to evening stillness is often marked by a sudden, surprising chill. You reach for thicker wraps and layers stored on a low wooden shelf inside the dwelling. The wool feels dense and slightly lanolin-scented, a deep, earthy aroma that speaks of animals and long wear. Wrapping yourself in these heavier textiles is more than simply dressing. It is an act of preparation against the environment, making yourself smaller and more contained as the world outside grows vast and cooling. The smell inside the home shifts now, becoming richer, denser. The earlier clean scents of hay and wet earth are overlaid by the scent of cooking wood mixed with old smoke that has permeated every beam and corner over generations. It is a comforting, slightly stale fragrance, the smell of permanency and shared shelter. As you move deeper into the sheltered part of the house, past the central hearth where embers are already beginning to glow faintly red beneath the ash, your senses adjust. The visual field narrows. The world becomes defined by these pools of deepening shadow, interrupted by tiny sparks of artificial light, the orange glow from a lamp or the faint shimmer of a remaining ember. You take a slow breath, letting the cooler, thicker air fill your lungs, and then exhale slowly, observing the plumes of breath visible in the semi-darkness. This measured rhythm helps to smooth out the transition from day's business to night's quiet containment. You consider the architecture itself. The way the rough timber frame holds back the vast emptiness of the outside world. The walls are thick, built to buffer not just against wind and cold, but against the unpredictable sounds that might accompany a difficult night. Every beam seems weighted with history. You run your hand along a splintered sill, feeling the ingrained smoothness worn down by countless hands performing similar rituals over centuries. The necessity of fire becomes profound in this deepening cool. The embers are not just for warmth or cooking. They represent control, humanity's ability to hold back the deep cold and darkness that constantly threatens the edges of existence. Gathering the last necessary pieces of dry tinder, you position them near the hearth pit, waiting patiently for the man who will eventually stoke the fire. The anticipation is a quiet energy, a held breath in the family rhythm. You stand momentarily at the threshold between the coolness outside and the contained warmth within. You are suspended between two worlds, the fading vitality of the day's tasks and the heavy, restful silence that promises deep sleep, punctuated only by the low sighs of sleeping animals or the occasional, soft thump of cooling stone. The passage from activity to stillness requires this slow, almost ceremonial attention. You observe how even mundane movements, lifting a bucket, stacking wood, adjusting a thick cloth, are imbued with purpose and care in the fading light. It is a gentle lesson in sufficiency. Everything needed for the next cycle is gathered tonight, maintained by the effort of these small actions now. The steady, measured pace of evening preparations sets the silent tone for the continuity of life here, day after long day, year after turning season. The sky outside has dimmed to a deep, bruised indigo, but it is not yet true night. You sit down on the low wooden bench near the edge of the house where the day's activities have paused. The cool air, gathered from the fields and banked by the stone walls, settles around you like a damp shawl. A thin, comforting smoke still drifts up from the hearth, carrying with it the faint, smoky scent of spent wood smoke, a smell that has become synonymous with the end of the day's labor. You watch as your housemates settle into their evening rhythms, the sounds blending together. The soft thump of a sack being placed on the ground, the rhythmic scrape of an implement against stone, and low murmurs that are more like sighs than words. These noises do not demand attention. They simply exist, woven into the fabric of this shared time. You finally settle near the main table, though it is cleared only for a single communal meal. The place setting is rudimentary. Wooden bowls and simple trenchers of bread laid out on rough linen cloths that have served their purpose many times before. Your family gathers around, forming a semicircle in the fading light. There is no sense of grand occasion here, merely the quiet necessity of nourishment. You observe the faces around you. They are etched with the lines of work and contemplation, lines that speak of shared seasons and accumulated knowledge. Each person carries the weight of their day's effort, but there is a noticeable ease in their movements now, the slow unwinding after a day spent bent over tasks. The simple meal consists of thick porridge, perhaps mixed with seasonal vegetables or grains ground into a soft mush. The steam rising from the bowl carries the scent of cooked oats and meadow herbs, a fundamentally earthy perfume that grounds you in this moment. You take your bowl, careful not to spill any of the warm, thick liquid onto the worn planks of the table. As you scoop the food with a wooden spoon, the texture is satisfyingly uniform, a ballast of sustenance needed for the long night ahead. You lift the bowl slowly and bring it close enough that the heat radiates gently into your palms, warming them against the evening chill. As the first bites are taken, the sound is soft, the gentle clinking of pottery against wood, punctuated by small, contented sighs. The conversation, when it comes, is not a torrent of anecdote or debate, but rather a trickle of observations. A mention of the unusual color of the morning sky, or how robustly the goat grazed near the western wall that afternoon. These are simple details, moments meant to anchor the day and acknowledge its steady passing. You listen to these murmurs, realizing that they do not need to solve any great mysteries. Their purpose is simply to fill the quiet gaps left by physical labor. It is a sound of contentment, tinged with exhaustion. Your attention shifts from the food to the light itself. The quality of illumination is shifting dramatically. The intense brightness of the afternoon has bled away entirely, replaced by this muted, dusky glow. The deepest shadows are beginning to pool in the corners of the room and beneath the wooden beams overhead. These shadows feel profound, not menacing, but merely existing, giving definition to the architecture of the dwelling. You notice how the faint light catches the dust motes suspended in the smoky air above the table, making them drift slowly like tiny, insignificant constellations. They remind you that even in this enclosed space, nothing remains static. Movement is constant, barely perceptible. After finishing your porridge, you do not immediately rise, but instead remain seated for a time, letting the residual warmth of the meal settle through you. Your fingers trace the worn grain of the wooden table beneath your palm, feeling the history in its deep imperfections. The scorch marks from countless fires, the smooth patina acquired by generations of hands resting upon it. This tangible surface connects you immediately to the steady continuity of life within these walls, a passage that has weathered time alongside you. The sounds now are even softer. The main warmth comes solely from the hearth, where wood continues to settle into glowing coals, producing only occasional bright flares and soft crackles. Outside, beyond the threshold, the evening noises begin in earnest. Perhaps the distant bleating of sheep settling down on higher ground, or the faint thump-snuffle sound as a creature shifts its weight nearby. These sounds are buffered by the thickness of the walls and the density of the shared living space, transforming them into background textures rather than sharp interruptions. You slowly rise from the bench. The shift in position feels weighted, carrying the residual calm of the meal. You move toward the trough, observing the remaining water. It is cooler now, smelling strongly of damp earth and minerals washed down by the day's runoff. You notice the residue on the stone lip of the trough. It reflects the dimming light with a dull, matte sheen. The act of simply standing there, breathing in this cool blend of smells, smoke, damp animal hair, cooked grains, and mineral water, is deeply restorative. Moving through your quiet routine, you might scoop up a small amount of leftover fodder or collect kindling that has fallen near the fire pit. Your movements are economical and unhurried. You observe how the ambient light changes with each step. Where before your path was clearly visible, now faint gradations of shadow make the corners deeper, more mysterious. This darkening sky reflects a deepening sense of time, the slow slide from active day to contained night. The quiet reflection settles over you, that this cycle, from the cool awakening to the smoky meal to the eventual gathering darkness, is not merely survival. It is a pattern of grace. Every action, whether it was mending a thread at dawn or sharing soup now under the gloaming sky, contributes to the maintenance of a deep, quiet equilibrium. You are part of this rhythm, gently moving within its predictable, comforting pulse. You turn your focus back toward the hearth, finding a comfortable spot on the straw-filled floor just outside the immediate warmth, but still protected by the house's embracing structure. The glowing embers provide enough soft illumination to ward off absolute blackness. You settle down and simply breathe deeply, allowing the scent of wood smoke, cool stone, and peaceful resignation to surround you. There is nothing left to accomplish for the hour, only the quiet act of being present within the enduring rhythm of this shared home. The last traces of the day's warmth linger near your bones, a subtle counterpoint to the growing chill in the air. You rise from the low bench where you ate, moving with an unhurried weight that seems more attuned to tired muscles than fresh vitality. The residual scent of the evening meal, a mix of cooked grains and wood smoke, still hangs lightly over the wooden planks of the hall. It is time for a quiet turning inward, a simple act of making ready for rest. You find yourself settled in a spot just beyond the immediate warmth of the hearth, where the cool stone floor meets the soft earth. The residual heat from the cooking fire has begun to dissipate, drawing with it the last sharp scents of wood smoke and damp grain. You are not trying to sleep, only suspended in the profound act of listening. Everything you do now is gentle, measured, designed only to keep you present in the moment. The day's movements, the clatter of buckets, the whisper of linens, the steady creaking of harnesses, have finally ceased. The silence that replaces them is not empty. It is full, weighted with the settling forms and sleeping rhythms of everyone nearby. It feels like a thick cloak of cool air drawing over the whole household. You take a slow breath, noticing the shift in your own chest, a steady, quiet expansion and release. You become acutely aware of the layers of accumulated smells. Beneath the fading warmth, there are notes of deep musk from the sleeping beasts, the sturdy scent of livestock settling into the straw bedding, the earthy dampness rising up from where the animal dung is naturally composting under the eaves, a faint but persistent tang of human sweat and oiled wool. These scents blend together, creating a complex, deeply ingrained odor map that defines this specific place in time and space. You breathe them in, not with revulsion, but with a quiet recognition of existence itself. The sounds begin subtly. First, the rhythmic puffs of breath from nearby sleeping forms, a low, steady sigh from the corner where the oxen rest, a sharper, quicker snuffling coming from a pallet covered in straw bedding, perhaps the occasional soft snort that escapes a mouth in deeper repose. These breathing rhythms are the clockwork of the night settling in. You track these patterns effortlessly, knowing each one belongs to a unique body, a life lived under this same roof. You shift slightly, pulling your tunic closer around you as the chill deepens. The air has a particular bite now, carrying the promise of the deep, undisturbed cold that will soon dominate the village. You remember the warmth of the fire only hours ago. It seems like another lifetime sensation, fading into memory. Your attention turns outward from the contained space of the home. If you listen carefully enough, past the immediate wall of your own dwelling, the sounds begin to travel across the common ground and into the village itself. It is a symphony played by distance and darkness. You hear the very first calls, perhaps an owl issuing its haunting, cyclical cry, a sound that seems woven from pure shadow and velvet air. This natural signal marks the deepest point of quietude. You focus on the subtle sounds related to the livestock outside the dwelling's immediate protection. There is a soft, sporadic shifting of hooves on the dirt path just beyond the doorframe, a goat perhaps moving against its enclosure, or maybe simply settling down for the long night. These small movements are infrequent but distinct, sounding loud in the sudden quiet. You observe that even in sleep, nothing here is truly static. There is always a slow adjustment, a soft twitch of an ear, a minute shift of weight on damp straw. The darkness itself feels substantial tonight. It presses close against the eaves and pools in the corners where light cannot reach. You notice how the rough-hewn timbers of the house absorb this deep night shadow, making every joint and knot seem heavier, more permanent. The world appears simplified by the lack of sunlight. Contours are sharp, textures are emphasized, and movement becomes startlingly obvious. You allow your thoughts to drift back to the nature of the sounds you hear. They are not just random noises. They form a kind of cohesive background texture to life. The occasional distant murmur, the soft crackle of burning peat in a neighbor's chimney many lanes away, or the gentle lapping sound of unseen water against stone. These details root you firmly in your place within this ancient community structure. The concept of silence here is always wrong. True silence does not exist under these northern skies and deep routines. What you experience is instead a layering. The foundational layer of breathing, covered by the intermittent rhythm of nature, underlined by the slow decay and eventual rebirth embodied in the cooling earth beneath your feet. You lift your hand slowly and study its own physical reality. The lines etched into your palms from years of work, the slight coolness gathering in the joints. These hands are accustomed to routine. They know the feel of rough wool, the smooth weight of a whetstone, the grit of harvested seeds. They have adapted to the steady, gentle tyranny of cyclical life. As you listen, you consider how much your own sense of time has slowed down. The frantic pace of some distant, imagined world does not exist here. Your day is defined by the cool breath before dawn, the heat of midday meal smoke, the labor of the afternoon, and now, this profound embrace of night. Each moment settles deeply into the marrow of your bones. The quiet company surrounding you, the animals, the worn wood, the simple earth floor, is not merely circumstantial. It is sustaining. Their needs are predictable, their presence constant. They do not demand complexity or rapid change. They simply exist in deep cycles of wakefulness and slumber, a reliable pattern against the vast indifference of time. You focus your hearing now on the subtle details, the dry rustle that accompanies a slight breeze moving through the thatch roof, the faint squeak when someone settles deeper into their pallet, the measured rhythm of the night itself passing. These sounds are affirmations, confirming that the world, despite the darkness and the weariness settling into muscle and bone, is steady. You realize that listening for these small, persistent noises is less an act of hearing and more an act of deep connection to the immediate reality surrounding you. It is a grounding practice, pulling your entire being out of thought and anchoring it firmly in the cool, scented, rhythmic moment of shared nocturnal existence. You simply exist within the hum. You have finally found a corner, perhaps just outside the immediate cluster of roofs and stalls. The air is cool now, having shifted from the close warmth of the bedding to the vast coolness of the open night. You sit down slowly, letting your legs adjust to the damp earth beneath you. It is late enough that the residual sounds of the village have begun to thin out. The murmur of voices has shrunk into whispers, and the clatter of any remaining goods has ceased. The profound quiet settles around you, a blanket woven from millions of tiny, cooling threads. You lift your gaze upward. It requires only this small act of physical effort, tilting the chin back and stretching the neck against the slight stiffness accumulated throughout the day's work. You look past the familiar geometry of the houses, the low roof lines, the sturdy chimneys that mark human habitation, and allow your sight to climb higher, away from the immediate needs of the hearth and the stall. There is a change in color and deepening of blackness overhead that seems absolute, consuming all residual light. It feels less like merely night and more like a substance itself, a curtain of deepest velvet drawn over the world. You observe how the edges of this black canvas interact with the faint glow emanating from the few remaining hearths below you, the small pools of artificial yellow warmth trapped within the valleys between buildings. The smell of the open air is different from the scent inside your home. It carries only the sharp, clean tang of cooling earth and distant wood smoke, mixed with a higher note. The faint, metallic sweet odor that belongs only to deep stillness and cold night. You notice how this cool air feels against exposed skin, a slight chill on the wrists, a whisper across the cheek. It is an invigorating coolness that draws deep, steady breaths into your lungs. You rest your hands on your knees for a moment, noticing the way your fingers are slightly stained with dust and residual grime from the day's labor. They feel solid and competent, carrying the evidence of work done. Slowly, you allow your attention to drift upward again, past the immediate weight of the surrounding world. The blackness is immense. It does not seem empty. Rather, it feels densely packed with something unseen, yet profoundly present. You wait until your eyes have adjusted completely, forcing them away from the comforting familiarity of candle glow and into this absolute void. Then, slowly, gradually, pinpoints begin to appear. They are not merely specks. They possess a magnificent quality, a cold, unwavering light that seems wholly separate from the heat and life below you. As more become visible, they accumulate with an astonishing rapidity, multiplying across the stretch of invisible fabric. You track their paths, sometimes slow, almost deliberate streaks, sometimes too swift to follow, merely brilliant flashes. Each one is intensely distant, yet simultaneously appears impossibly close. You find yourself studying particular constellations, recognizable patterns that have defined human thought for millennia. There are figures arranged in the star stream, faint groupings that someone might call heroes or mythical beasts, their arrangement dictated by nothing but unimaginable cosmic mechanics. You consider the sheer scale of this map, a geometry written not in clay tablets, but in pure light. It is unsettling to contemplate the distance. The journey from your skin, here on this damp earth, to the nearest visible source of stellar brilliance would take days, perhaps weeks, traversing unimaginable voids of nothingness. Yet, when you gaze into them, their quiet light seems to pass through all those intervening measures and settle directly upon you. The thought drifts naturally. How small your immediate life is against this backdrop. Your struggles with the yield of the harvest, the cost of the winter firewood, the care required for a sick animal. These are matters that occupy every waking hour. They dictate the rhythm of your labor and your anxieties. But up here, the sky simply records existence. The stars do not acknowledge the cycle of debt or profit. They do not change their pattern because the granary is full or empty. Their light remains constant in its grand indifference. This contemplation brings a strange sense of equilibrium, a sudden lightening of the burdens that had settled upon your shoulders throughout the day's labor. You breathe deeply, taking in the cold, clean air. The scent here is only space and deep night. You realize that all the sounds you heard earlier, the distant crackle of a fire, the muffled snore from a stall nearby, the occasional call of a night bird, were small footnotes compared to the vast, resounding silence suggested by the heavens. Your attention wanders back down to the earth where you sit. You are still connected to it. Your weight rests upon the damp ground, and sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear the faint tick of nearby water dripping from an eaves or a guttering wood structure nearby. These sounds act as a subtle anchor, reminding you that while your consciousness has briefly lifted into the infinite expanse, your body remains firmly rooted in this small, human-shaped valley. You watch how the brightest stars seem to pulse slightly against the deeper blackness. It is not a beat of life, but perhaps simply the trick of your tired eyes adapting to such profound luminosity. You find yourself shifting subtly, adjusting your posture on the cool ground, feeling the rough texture of your woolen clothing against your skin. The great canvas continues its silent show. It speaks not in words of man, but in patterns of light that suggest boundless time. You are merely a momentary witness to this ancient conversation between matter and light. And as the hours continue to slide into deep pre-dawn darkness, a state you will eventually face again, you feel the relentless pull of gravity returning your focus downward, back toward the warm, complex